BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast, where we ask whether the government's hoped-for reset could bring easier trade with the EU.
It's reducing the variability, the sort of individuality, if you like, that seems to be occurring at the UK border control posts, where a particular decision can result in millions of pounds in lost revenue.
We'll have more on that a little later. First, though, the long-term health of our soils has become an issue of concern for conservationists and farmers alike. Under the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme, which replaced EU payments in England, farmers can be paid for improving their soils. But how easy it is to do depends on local geology. I met James Busher at Nettishall, who's converting the farm to a regenerative system, keeping soil covered with crops and using as little artificial fertiliser as possible. But he's doing it in the sandy, stony Brecklands, where growing any crops can be difficult at the best of times.
The clover's great.
Yeah. We put it in with an oil-seed rape truck a couple of years ago.
I'm walking through a field with James Busher, who's a regenerative farmer on the edge of Thetford Forest in Norfolk. We're in the Brecklands. Just tell me what's under our feet here.
Lots of sand. Generally the soil's low organic matters, prone to drought, and most of them have probably been overworked a bit too much with too much tillage, and they're a bit shot.
How are you actually making this soil farmable?
Between 2003 and 2018, we were seeing our cereal yields drop up to 50% in some cases, despite putting on more or certainly the same amount of inputs. And at that time, we were putting on a lot of fungicides and synthetic fertiliser. And we were seeing this yield drop. So we realised that something needed to be done. And the other thing was we were not finding any worms on the land, and they're an easy barometer for soil health. So we looked at cover crops initially. We wanted to just not leave any bare soil. If you leave bare soil, the top can cap, and then when you get heavy rain, the water just won't infiltrate and will run off the field. The topsoil will end up in the rivers and the watercourses and the roads.
You've got a spade.
Yep.
We're standing in a field. Do you want to just show me what you've created here?
Yeah. So we're trying to keep living roots in the soil as much as we can. Straight after harvest, we're planting cover crop mixes like this, which there's this clover. We've got some vetch, a bit of fodder rape, and also some ryegrass. And this will remain in place until the spring, protecting soil, banging through any compacted layers.
The roots are going down.
The roots are doing that, and so we're leaving the soil covered right through until March, when we're going to plant a spring pea crop.
Let's open it up and see what we've got. Do you know, that doesn't look like...
It doesn't look that like Breck soil.
Shot sandy soil to
No.
me. You can feel the sandy grains, but there's quite a lot of...
A bit more body to it, I think.
Yeah, there is
probably.
a bit of body to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. The plants are helping build organic matter in the soil, so they will be improving soil. The microbes beneath are also doing a fantastic job at building soil aggregation, but they need living roots in the soil to sort of perform their job.
Talking about fertility onto soil is part of your whole scheme, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. So since 2018, we started growing cover crops. That was our first sort of change, rather than leaving bare soil through the winter. And my neighbour's got a lot of sheep, so he brought sheep on to graze those cover crops down. And then from 2021, we allowed him to start grazing our winter cereals as well as the cover crops. So crops that we were planted in October, he'd be grazing them with the sheep in January, February.
Do they grow again afterwards?
Yeah, they grow again. The sheep are acting as a plant growth regulator, so we only allow him to go on the fields where the crop is quite forward, if it's been a mild autumn. Free manure, plant growth regulation, and also they're eating any diseased leaves. The first year we did it on a cereal crop was in 2021, and we actually only did one field as a trial, a wheat field. And then at harvest time the next year, that field yielded 2 tonnes, just under 2 tonnes a hectare, more than any of the other winter wheat fields. That was a bit of a light bulb moment.
That was James Busher. 2/3 of farmland in England is farmed or part-farmed by tenants. That's a figure from the Rock Review, a report commissioned by the last government into the tenanted sector. All week we're looking at tenant farmers. They rent the land they farm rather than owning it, but they do own any livestock and crops they grow. The 2022 report followed an independent review of tenant farming in England, chaired by the Conservative peer Baroness Kate Rock. It made recommendations including increasing the length of tenancies, appointing a new tenant farmer commissioner, and making sure new farm payment schemes, known as ELMs, are accessible to tenants. Well, Baroness Rock is herself a tenant, farming 450 hectares of arable and a small beef herd with her father in Dorset. Rebecca Rooney went to her farm near Dorchester to find out whether she thinks the recommendations she made are being put into practice.
Hello. Yeah, they're in very good voice today.
Don't you always get a welcome like this? Shall we move
Shall
away?
we go move a little bit away from them?
Yeah, we'll go somewhere a little bit quieter.
At the moment, we have very short-term tenancies in England. They average about 3.5 years. If you're a tenant farmer, that doesn't give you much room to think about the long term. So one of the very strong recommendations was to ensure that we had really longer-term tenancies, and that is something that we haven't seen yet. And I'm really hoping that landlords will look at that and that agents will be recommending much longer tenancies.
Overall, what are you pleased with? What's gone well?
So I think I'm going to pick on three things that have gone well. The first is the establishment of the Farm Tenancy Forum. That has been a very, very good thing for the sector. They have been very good at driving things like progress in the ELM scheme design, making sure that all the schemes are accessible and flexible for tenant farmers. The second would be the Commissioner for the tenant farming sector. It's not the answer to all the challenges facing our nation's tenant farmers, but it's a really great step in the right direction. The Commissioner is going to oversee and encourage the Code of Practice. And the Code of Practice has now been adopted by all relevant farming organisations. The Crown Estate has put the Code of Practice into their new environmental farm business tenancies. That's a huge step forward. The Duchy of Cornwall are embedding it into all the work that they're doing. I'm really pleased that Savills have actually included the code in their own standard agreements, and I'd like to see that really being championed across the whole farming community.
Those are the things that you feel have gone well.
Yes.
What are you disappointed in?
The government is talking a lot about diversification. Many tenant farmers cannot diversify. It is not in their tenancy agreements. So I do think that needs to be understood at the heart of government, that diversification is a real challenge for tenant farmers.
Over there, done some hedge laying. You're making good again.
We are. So this is the start of a big project that we're going to be doing, looking at all the hedgerows on the farm. There's a lot of talk about tree planting. Tenant farmers can't plant trees. That's a change of land use. So, you can't have change of land use in your tenancy agreement. So hedgerows, for tenant farmers are a really important part of that biodiversity that we're all looking to achieve.
People might be a bit surprised to hear that as a tenant farmer, you can't do woodland creation. You can't plant trees on the land you farm.
No, you can't. No. A lot of tenancy agreements fall under the definition of agriculture and also the rules of good husbandry. The definition of agriculture is still in place from the 1947 Act, very much based on post-war food productivity. There obviously wasn't much in there about nature and the environment. And actually one of the areas that I'm very keen to progress and hasn't been progressed in government at all, and one of the recommendations of the review was really to look at modernising the legislation around the agricultural tenancy sector, particularly with focus around the definition of agriculture. It needs to be a modern definition.
Baroness Kate Rock. Well, DEFRA told us the government champions a vibrant tenant sector and has already delivered the majority of the Rock Review recommendations. On the point about the definition of agriculture, DEFRA told us land managed under an environmental agreement will qualify for agricultural property relief from April this year, saying this will remove one of the key barriers to delivering environmental activities on tenanted land. The Prime Minister has been with EU leaders in Brussels intending to reset the UK's position with the EU. The government has promised the UK will not rejoin the EU single market or customs union or sign up to freedom of movement, but it is seeking a veterinary agreement with the EU to free up trade in food and animal products, something some farmers and food businesses have been calling for. Professor Amelia Hadfield, founding director of the Centre for Britain and Europe at the University of Surrey, told me there is currently an unbalanced playing field for food imports.
Food producers are looking very much at reworking the way in which the UK border control posts operate, and very much at reducing the variability in how veterinary controls themselves are applied at UK border control posts. The problem at this stage of the game is that individual veterinary decisions are being taken in a way that produces inconsistent outcomes.
And would that mean just simplifying the system, basically?
I think we're looking at simplifying and aligning. It's reducing the variability, the sort of individuality, if you like, that seems to be occurring at the UK border control posts, where a particular decision can result in millions of pounds in lost revenue. I think if we're going to see a public commitment to implementing a veterinary agreement, a UK-EU veterinary agreement, to ease the situation in terms initially of Britain-Northern Ireland trade, but I think much more broadly between Britain and the whole of the European Union. So both sides can ensure, competitiveness really, but also sustainability, I think, more broadly.
And safety? What about safety? Because we had heard quite a bit about, illegal meat imports coming in.
Yes, absolutely. So compliance is incredibly important. I think the point is really to try to reduce what is clearly burdensome and inefficient and costly paperwork on either side. At the same time, of course, safety is absolutely number one. Both sides are going to want to make sure that they're across that.
What about the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention? Should the UK be part of that?
It's certainly something they should give due consideration to. It's not quite a customs union, but it removes customs on the components that go into a single product, which are sourced from other countries, which are signed up to the convention. Now, the UK hasn't said no. It hasn't ruled out signing up to this. And it's not seen, interestingly, by the UK government as a breach of its red lines. And food is a good example. Just-in-time supply chains, I think they would welcome that move. But other manufacturers may be exposed to greater competition. So they're going to have to, I think the government will have to look carefully at the cross-sectoral impact that joining the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention is going to bring about.
President Trump is talking about putting tariffs on EU produce. Could that impact the UK's trading relationship with the EU, do you think?
It may very well. First of all, it's going to blight the EU and it's going to cause economic disruption. But in terms of trade, interestingly, the EU may struggle to find alternative markets for affected exports, which in some areas may make the UK look a slightly warmer customer, if you like. So there are options perhaps to possibly reset some of the trading dynamics. At the same time, the UK, even if the fingers of the White House isn't pointed at us directly, I think we are very likely to feel the indirect effects pretty materially.
Professor Amelia Hadfield from the University of Surrey. That's all from us today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.